Welcome to my second podcast, in which I'll be talking about the lens through which we at the Fair Digest view the world. So here's a history lesson. Yes, I know it may seem boring, but when I'm done, or rather a while into these podcasts, you may be able to understand why we as humans are the way we are today and why the world works the way it does. So, though race isn't real and is in fact a social construct, it was designed as a means to protect, enrich, and uplift white people and oppress all others that do not fit into that category. Before you jump and become uncomfortable if you are white and watching this, don't be, because the way it's being constructed makes it normal. So, some of you who have guilt feelings about being in a group that oppresses another, don't feel guilty. Your guilt feelings doesn't help change the way the situation is because that's the way it's been designed. Please excuse my voice if it does sound a bit hoarse because I have flu at the moment. Let me explain further. About 50 years ago, Derek Albert Bell Jr., a legal scholar and educator born in 1930, strove to confront racism that he found to be ingrained in American legal and social structures. So I'm not going to go into every aspect of his life or how he likes his coffee. But in 1971, he became the first tenured African American professor at Harvard Law School after being a lecturer since 1969. So what does Derek Bell have to do with me, you ask? Well, he wrote a book called Racism, and American Law in 1973, which was groundbreaking because it introduced the concept of critical race theory. Now, central to critical race theory, or CRT, as I'm going to be calling it, is that racism is much more than individual prejudice and bigotry. So racism is institutional, it's systemic, structural, cultural, societal, and discursive, not merely individual, and is deeply embedded into the very fabric of our society. That's why it's viewed as normal. It's not normal though. It's just made to seem normal. So before you think that maybe I've lost the plot, may I suggest that you watch a movie with Jim Carrey called The Truman Show. In that movie, excuse me, sorry about that. For some of you who haven't seen it, that boy, since birth, grows up in a world that's constructed by Hollywood and he's led to believe that the life that he lives is, in fact, his real life. The friends that he has, his parents, the schools, everything about that is wonderful. And life is wonderful for him. Until one day, as an adult, he starts realizing, and he realizes that the life that he's lived is a lie constructed for ratings. And so he goes in search of the truth. Race and racism is based on a similar principle, hence its seeming normality. This week, I'd like to talk about institutionalized racism. So institutionalized racism merely means racism that was legalized. Examples of are the 13th Amendment of the US Constitution, the separate but equal Jim Crow laws started after the American Civil War in the 1870s, and of course apartheid in South Africa. So immediately you might, and you wouldn't be wrong I suppose if you think that, hold on, if those laws have been repealed, that means racism doesn't exist anymore. But think about it for a moment. If laws were made to legalize racism and suddenly those laws are done away with, does that change the way people are towards each other? Simply because there's laws prohibiting discrimination? Of course it doesn't. Because if we as a society consist of only law-abiding citizens, there'd be no need for prisons. So let me put it another way. A protection order has never stopped a person in its tracks from getting to the person who applied for the protection order, isn't it? It is, after all, only a piece of paper. And often what's on that paper is ignored. And the person that wants to get to the victim simply just goes after them anyway. So the victim is still in harm's way of being hurt or killed. The abuse, the way that's on the protection order, has almost become normalized, almost habit forming. So it's much like driving on the right side of the road seems normal in the States. But for drivers in other countries who drive on the left hand side, suddenly having to switch over when you're in the States seems almost abnormal. I'm not trying to minimize the devastating effects of racism because as a child I lived through that. I lived through apartheid. I lived through the tear gas. I lived through the burning tires, the army constantly in our streets, the people being killed and arrested. I've lived through that. Those type of things I've lived through. I was beaten when I was 13, 14 by a policeman. Those type of things for us as people of color seemed normal, even though we knew that it wasn't. All I'm trying to do is I'm attempting to explain to you that just because laws have changed doesn't mean that people who uphold those laws suddenly have these epiphanies or all become, wow, let's all get together and sing kumbaya. Of course, it doesn't happen. Besides the fact that they've been socialized into this racist system that we live in. I wouldn't be educating. There'd be no need for me to educate if that was the case. There'd be no need for right-wing groups. Well, actually, there'd be no rise in right-wing groups. My apologies. Or there'd be no need for movements to highlight the continued inequality black and brown people face. I really hope you think it over. Think and mull it over in your head, and then next week I'll tackle systemic racism and give you examples of that too. Please subscribe to our weekly actuality magazine at www.thefairdigest.com. Like and share this podcast and feel free to comment below. Lastly, we need to all live consciously. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next week on Thesna Talks.